Story 1. I saw something in the fog in the early morning on the last day of family vacation. Nobody would believe what hunted us. I awoke early in the morning. I believe it was between the hours of 5 and 6. My wife wanted us to get a head start and leave the cabin before the weekend traffic. I can never sleep when I have a stressful itinerary, so I walked downstairs to use the bathroom and get ready for the day. As I tiptoed down the hallway, I peeked into my kids' room to find that they were still sleeping. The stairway leading to the ground floor was too dim to see in, barely illuminated by the still-rising sun. I held on to the handrail, trying not to slip on the steep set of stairs. The bathroom was adjacent to the sunroom. The sunroom was my favorite room because it could view the valley under the mountain through a large glass window. I stopped for a moment to admire the beauty of an early morning. The valley glowed a dark grey as the fog rose up from the ground. The mist was so dense that I could barely see 20 feet in front of the cabin. I smiled before entering the bathroom. When I was finished, I looked out in the field again to see that the fog had thinned and decent visibility had returned. I began ascent upstairs when I had to do a double-take, for I was unsure what I saw. In the distance, I viewed a tall black shape that resembled a stick figure. It was hunched over with all 4 of its limbs to the ground, like a dog getting ready to pounce. The figure must have been 10 feet tall, with disproportionate legs far longer than any human. It didn't look like a solid creature, but it instead looked as if a shadow had taken corporeal form. "What the hell?" I said. I approached the window when, to my great horror, the creature took a step. I squinted my eyes, trying to discern whether I mistook an oddly shaped tree. I fell back into the nearest chair and tried to catch my breath. The figure had moved its right arm. It then moved its right leg. The movements were slow and unnatural, like the movements of a character from an old-fashioned stop-action film. My heart began racing. I moved slowly, trying to make sure this thing couldn't detect my presence. As I drove, it continued its slow march in my direction. When I was out of view and safely in the staircase, I dashed up the stairs. I needed to get my wife and my kids in the car so we could get the hell away from whatever that thing was. Screw our bags. I could come back and collect our items when I had the National Guard and a bloody priest to ward off whatever the hell that was. I entered the kids' bedroom to see that Michael had woken up, but Kate was still asleep. "Michael," I said, "I need you to wake your sister up and get dressed. I'll be back in a minute to get you 2 out the door." He hopped out of bed. I tried to remain as calm as possible, but I could tell he knew something was wrong. He looked at me wide-eyed. "I will explain when we get to the car, but we need to go now." He nodded, but his bottom lip quivered. I dashed back into my bedroom to wake Mary. "Mary," I said. I tapped her on the shoulder, and she opened her eyes, annoyed. "What time is it?" She spoke as if she was still a teenager having to be woken up to go to school. "We need to go now." I grabbed my phone, wallet, and keys from the bedstand. "What's wrong?" She sat up in bed when she detected the urgency in my voice. "There is something in the yard," I said. "What is in the yard?" Her eyes opened wide, and she grabbed my arm. "I have no fucking clue. We just need to go." I tried to escape her grasp, but she kept her grip tight around me. "What is in the yard?" Each syllable she spoke was deliberate. "Okay, just go look for yourself." I led her to the hall window, and we gazed down into the yard below. The thing was still there, lurking. Its pace had quickened, and it was coming right in our direction. Mary stood there for a moment, contemplating if she was dreaming or not. I watched her face turn from shock to confusion until it finally rested on pure terror. "Daddy," said Michael. He snuck up behind us, startling the both of us. "I am all dressed." "Okay," I said. Mary and I looked at each other. Her jaw was clenched, and I noticed that she was shaking. Without saying a word, I grabbed Michael and held him tight in my arms. Kate waddled out from the bedroom, and Mary snatched her up. I led the way, carrying Michael down the stairs slowly. He was silent, but his grip around my shoulders was almost suffocating. "Mommy, I'm scared," said Kate. She, too, could detect the tension in the air. Mary shushed her, saying, "It's okay. We just need to be really quiet right now." "But I'm scared." "Quiet."
I snapped here.
Tears welled in her eyes. Mary then nestled Kate close to her body, so the sobbing was muffled. We walked into the sunroom to find that the creature was far closer than before. It had now found a steady pace. It was approaching at a moderate speed, but still too fast for my comfort. "Mary," I said, "I am going to run out and start the car. I will drive as fast as I can to the door. You get the kids and throw them in the back and hop in." She nodded slowly, not letting her gaze leave the approaching creature. I dropped Michael on the ground and had him stand next to Mary. "Keep your eyes closed," I said. Michael shut his eyes tight and nodded. Kate continued to cry, and I saw a tear fall from Michael's eye. I opened the front door, looked down the hill. The car was about 50 feet away from me. With my keys in hand, I started my run to the car. It was then the creature stopped. It stood there for a moment as I ran at full speed. It then rose onto its hind legs and stood tall like a human. It reached its arms out behind it and arched backward. Suddenly I felt a vibration so intense that I fell to the ground. I heard something faintly, but it was too deep, and my eardrums could barely make it out. It sounded metallic, like a brass instrument being listened to by somebody underwater. I rose to my feet and kept running. For a moment, everything became a blur, but I suddenly found myself behind the wheel. I opened the automatic doors of the minivan and drove. I noticed that the creature was no longer standing on its hind legs, but was crouched like an Olympic runner preparing for a sprint. I gulped. Mary was waiting with the kids outside as I pulled up to the cabin. She threw them in the back without buckling them in and then jumped in the front. "What are you waiting for? Go!" She held onto the armrest as I reversed the car and turned around. As we turned around to face it, it confronted us head-on. I stepped on the gas, and it charged at us. We drove down the old rural driveway as fast as we could. The creature, at full speed, ran like a horse would in slow motion. It almost floated as it ran, giving the impression that it was light as a cloud. Mary let out a scream as Kate continued to bawl in the back seat. I kept my eyes on the road, knowing it would do no good for me to continue to watch as we were stalked by the creature. My family's screaming continued, then turned to a sob, then silence. We had made it to the main road when I finally dared to look in the rearview window. "It's gone," I said. Nobody responded. Everyone's eyes were red. We drove to a nearby diner on the main road, feeling relieved to finally have human contact other than ourselves. We ate in silence and barely spoke until we arrived home. When I got home, I called the property manager to explain why we had not packed up our things. I couldn't explain what that thing was if I tried. What we witnessed was so out of the ordinary that I had to invent a tale. "A strange man was standing in the yard," I said. "It looked like he was stalking the house." We had no phone service, so we all got in the car and drove as fast as possible. The property manager understood, but explained that we could have called the police on the in-house landline. I said we were too terrified to think of that. The property manager told me he could contact the police to survey the area. We arranged to meet at the property the following day to collect my things before the next guests arrived. I have to admit, I was a bit afraid to return to the property, but was assured when both the property manager and 2 police cars were on the scene. I told them a strange man was standing right where the creature stood. They looked around but couldn't find anyone. They told the property manager to warn the future guests about any strange characters around. I made up some generic description, but essentially said the man was too far away to make out any discernible features. I collected my family's things and then left. As I left the property, I glanced in the woods adjacent to the field and swore that I saw a figure, doing nothing but standing there, lurking. My family has not spoken of the incident since, and I am too afraid to share it with others because of its implausibility. That is why I must get it out there anonymously, for keeping it to myself is eating me up inside. I now don't drink liquids near bedtime because I am too afraid to get up and go to the bathroom early in the morning. Story 2. My parents recently came back from vacation, but something was off. I can't believe I'm telling this, but I need to share it with someone else. My parents always like to travel during December/January. They own a small restaurant, which I'm in charge 90% of the time, but I always tell them to enjoy their vacation as much as they can and not to worry about the business. This year, they decided to go to South America. Since I'm single and live not so far from their house, they always ask me to stay there and take care of Toby, a grumpy old bulldog. And so I did. Toby is super chill, and we usually just hang out at the couch when I arrive from the restaurant. Also, my family is pretty small. I'm an only child, and so is my mom. My dad had a brother who died 13 years ago. And that's it. I still have no kids, and I plan on staying like that. Yesterday, I was taking my after-work nap, but the sound of the front door opening woke me up. I instinctively jumped out of the couch, but to my surprise, it was my parents. I was confused. I asked them why did they come back this early, since they told me they would arrive by January 20th. They looked kinda sad, and Dad told me that things were not so great and they decided to come back earlier. I asked why they didn't call me to go pick them up at the airport, but my dad told me that they didn't want to bother me and they got a cab instead. I was still quite disoriented, but whatever. I decided to go back to my place that same night, but they asked me if I could stay a few more days to take care of Toby, because they were quite tired. Can't say no, right? Toby was acting kinda weird and refused to leave my side. Also, my parents didn't interact with him at all, which was odd. I thought it was just tiredness, or maybe they had a fight and needed to cool their heads a little bit. But I just shrugged it off and went to my old bedroom. In a few minutes, me and Toby were sleeping like babies. Around 2 a.m., I woke up thirsty as hell. As I was walking to the kitchen, I heard some weeping coming from their bedroom. I would not knock and ask if everything was fine because, never bother your parents in their bedroom, no matter how old you are. I could just ask it in the morning anyways. Today, as I went downstairs for breakfast, they were both there already, staring at each other. Not a single word or movement. I looked at them and asked if everything was fine. They slowly turned their heads in my direction and said, yes. For some reason, I got chills down my spine. They are usually super talkative, but something was wrong. I told them I wasn't going to eat because I was late, but the reality is that I was just feeling uncomfortable around them. They ignored what I said, and I just went to the restaurant trying not to overthink too much. Maybe one of them fucked up real bad. 40 years of marriage is not for everyone. I was expecting the "we need to talk" stuff when I got home. During my shift, I felt that I needed to talk to my dad. The usual father/son thing. Maybe I could help. I don't know. My parents hate SMS or anything that makes them type. To contact them, you got a call. So I tried. Once, twice. But it wouldn't even work. It was like the phone was out of battery. I tried to call my mom just as an excuse to talk to my dad, but the same thing was happening. Their house has no landline anymore, so I was out of options. I made it through the day, trying to be rational about it. Maybe they had a huge fight, forgot to charge their phones, and are just super mad at each other. I just needed to give them space. A few hours ago, I arrived at their house. Everything was super quiet. I yelled, "Mom, Dad, I'm home." But nothing. I went upstairs to see if they were sleeping, and I found Toby was sitting static by their bedroom door. Tried playing with him, but it was like he was hypnotized. I knocked and asked if they were inside and if everything was fine. Instead of a straight answer, what I heard was, It took me a few seconds to process that, but I tried again and heard the same thing, I said, "Fuck it," and just went back downstairs to grab a beer. Suddenly, my phone rang. When I looked at the screen, it was a number that I didn't recognize. When I said, "Hello," a lady on the other side said my name and asked if it was me, and I confirmed. What she said next was, "Sir, I'm really sorry, but we were contacted by the U.S. Embassy in Brazil to inform that 2 days ago your parents went to hike with a group of people, but somehow they disappeared. Search groups have been mobilized and are trying their best to find them. Did your parents try to contact you?" I was completely baffled, and after a few seconds I said, "What are you talking about?" "They are here." But seems like the lady couldn't hear me. She kept saying, "Sir? Sir? Are you there?" and hung up. This is when I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I slowly turned my head and saw my dad, with a gruesome wound on his neck. And before I lost my senses, he asked, "Did they find us yet?" Story 3. My friend's family vacation. My friend Charles told me about this story a while ago. We're both 28 now, so it was a long time ago. I didn't know him then, so I don't know how credible the entire story is, but he seemed really shaken when he told me. He was about 14 when he went to Cranberry Lake in West New Jersey. Coming from living in Brooklyn, it was a completely different world. It was his spring vacation. His dad had just gotten a promotion 2 months ago, so he decided to use his bonus and holiday time to spend with his family. They were supposed to be there for a week and a half, but they ended up cutting the trip a week short. His dad got a hold of the key to a small lake house that one of the higher-ups owned. I guess it was sort of a bonus for the promotion or whatever. He said everything was awesome up until the 3rd day. He always felt strange about it. The lake was tinted a deep red because of the runoff from cranberry farms in the area. I imagine it would be kinda off-putting in a way. He said they had a great time. The house came fully stocked and had a small motorboat which they used for fishing and generally hauling ass all over the lake. One day he said that they hit something in the middle of the lake, and it was pretty deep. His dad said it was probably just a log or whatever. Later that day they all headed into town and hit a small diner for a late lunch. He said he overheard people talking about an accident earlier in the lake. From what he overheard, it was about a small child drowning on the north side. He didn't think much of it. Children drown. Sure, he felt bad, but what was he going to do? After lunch they went back and did some swimming and the usual vacation stuff. That night his dad woke him up close to midnight for some night fishing. He said the big fish come up at that time and are easier to catch. So after my friend had some coffee and a snack, they got everything ready and headed out in the boat. After about an hour or so of fishing, his dad opened up a small blue cooler and handed him a beer, saying that he'd have to learn to love it eventually. After all, no man is complete without a beer. A few hours passed, and they were having a good old father and son fishing experience. They caught a few fish, nothing huge, but large enough to have lunch the next day. My friend's line got snagged on something, and no matter what they couldn't get it free, so his dad went for the knife. It wasn't in the tackle box, or in the boat anywhere. He had just used it to cut up some bait, so he looked in the bait bucket. No knife. His dad ended up pulling the line until it broke, but they had to go in because they didn't have a knife. Frustrated, his dad drove them in. When they docked, my friend noticed the knife on the last plank of wood. He pointed it out to his dad. He checked out the knife and verified that it was his pocket knife that he had used in the boat just 20 minutes ago. My friend has no idea how it got there. Neither does his dad. The next morning they all woke up and had breakfast. His sister and Mom went to go for a morning swim. His sister came running back into the house a bit freaked out, so they went to go see what all the fuss was about. On the dock they saw all the fish they had caught the night before, which they put in the fridge for the next day. The fish were all chopped up and spread around the dock, with a knife sticking straight out of the last plank. In the boat there was a fish head, and a Jurassic Park toy, one of the velociraptors that had the moving mouth. No one had any idea where it came from, but the dad was really frustrated that the fish they caught were ruined. A few hours later there was a knock on the door. His dad answered, and there was a very old man, maybe 80 or so. He had their tackle box. He said he had found it on his dock, and knew they were the only people around the lake he didn't know. When his dad asked him how he found the tackle box, because he had left it in the garage, the old man simply replied, "You must have pissed off the lake." After that he left. They were all confused about what had happened, but quickly shrugged it off. A few days passed and nothing happened. They went back to the diner again, but this time when they went in everyone got really quiet. It wasn't like last time, with the chit-chat and gossip of a small town. It was eerie. They sat down, had their food, and left. When they got back to the house they noticed the motor on the boat was running, but there wasn't a key in it. When his dad and himself got to the boat to check it out, he said there were hundreds of fish heads in it, and when his mom and sister got in the house the sink was full of fish, and there was one small bloody handprint on the fridge. The knife was sticking out of the cutting block in the kitchen. It had one word scratched in it, "Sorry." After that they packed their things up as fast as they could and left. They still never got an explanation, and the big cheese at the office just said the kids there like to play pranks, but I still wouldn't go to that lake. And he still won't go fishing. Anyone have some kind of explanation? Water demons? Jason? Anything?